Welcome back to Stories from the Field, Mental Health, and the Outdoors. I'm your host, Will White, and I'm thrilled to share that this podcast is available in video format now on YouTube. So check out the show notes for the link and subscribe there too. We are in season 24, where we're turning our focus on to boys and men and how time and nature, along with intentional connection, can support their mental health and emotional well being. I just returned from a powerful men's retreat, and I'll be reflecting on that experience in upcoming episodes. But in today's episode, I am so honored to be joined by Nick Mann, a former Marine Corps infantry officer, wilderness therapy program director, and the founder of the Dads Project, a podcast and community focused on supporting fathers. Nick brings a unique perspective shaped by leadership in the military, the challenges of fatherhood, and deep commitment to helping men reconnect with themselves and others through coaching and the outdoors. If this conversation resonates with you, please rate and subscribe to the podcast. It really helps us reach more listeners and continues to support these important conversations. You can find over 270 episodes on storiesfromthefield.com and reach out to me directly there. And if you are interested in men's coaching or retreats, check out my new project, the White Mountain Adventure Institute at wmai.org. As I always like to say, everyone has a story to share, and if we listen, we learn. So grab your earbuds, step outside, and let's dive into another compelling conversation. Nick Mann, so grateful to have you on Stories from the Field.
It is a joy and honor to be on the show. Have listened to, I think, every episode, read your book. So it's truly an honor to be here today.
Oh, the honor is truly mine, because this is the first season I have dedicated to exploring men and boys. I've actually had seasons about women or former students or parents or people who work with autism. And I was like, all this time, I didn't do anything about men. And I just got back from a men's retreat, and we were talking about getting you on. And so starting with Nick Mann for this season of Men, and you have had a really interesting career path, and you have a podcast and you're coaching. So let's just start with talk about your new podcast and your coaching service.
Yeah, absolutely. I created the Dads Project podcast and Dads Project as an entity. And truly the focus is sharing the stories, much your book and your podcast, stories from fatherhood and the challenges and the beautiful moments that dad experience, often in a silo. We think that we're alone, but giving dads an outlet to share their stories. This is what I love being about a dad. This is what I've gone through. This is the ups and downs. And I think it's just a beautiful opportunity for men and more one step deeper dads to be connected and to hear that we're all going through this. We're all just figuring it out and doing the best that we can. So we've got the podcast. I think we're somewhere between 15 and 20 episodes deep. And then the goal, as we've talked about before, is to launch retreats as we head into the fall to give dads an opportunity to get out of distraction, whether that's work or social media or TV or whatever it may be, and get back to just being present. And in my mind, that starts with being present with themselves first, and then returning home with a renewed energy to be present for their partners, present for their children, and again, maintain that presence for themselves.
Oh, I can't say enough about men's retreats for being able to return much clearer and present for your partner, for your kids, and for yourself, really, what's
Right.
important in your life. So what inspired you to do this? Right? What brought you? Because you've been in the military, you worked in wilderness therapy, you've done a lot of different things. What was the journey into this? When did you become a father? What inspired you?
Yeah. So, really, to start working with men, it was a combination of quite a few things. So, I had been in the health and fitness industry for a while post military, and I was like, I'm going to start a men's group focused on health and fitness. But lo and behold, I realized that a lot of the issues, or maybe all of the issues with health and wellness, really came back to mental and emotional well being for men. Yes, maybe they weren't eating appropriately or they were turning to alcohol, but when it came down to it, it was their mental and emotional well being that was really limiting their ability to be the most physically healthy that they could be. And then I started reconnecting with friends from college, and lo and behold, many of them were struggling with mental and emotional well being. And I'm like, okay, it's veterans, men that I served with that are challenged mentally and emotionally. It's the men that are in my gym every day that are struggling mentally and emotionally. And it's friends back home that I grew up with or that I went to school with that are also struggling. I'm like, this is not just one section of my life. Every single aspect of my life was impacted with men who were challenged in this area. And I'm not sure you know this, but I went back to grad school for clinical mental health counseling and started pursuing a degree in counseling, and just I was like, what can I do? And that led to starting to work with men in small groups. Hey, let's just meet once every 2 weeks, an hour at night. Let's check in. What's going well for you? What's going not well? And then that has evolved. I became a dad almost 2 years ago and also a stepdad three and a half, 4 years ago. And I was like, wow, this is that next level because not only are you caring for yourself, but that responsibility for you to be the example of mental and emotional well-being is now elevated. So I took it one step deeper from just working with men to now focused on working with dads because we speak the same language. We have shared experience. And I think that'll come up as we talk more is what is that shared common experience, positive or negative, that we can connect on and we can start this journey of growth together.
Super cool. You went to graduate school recently. I went to graduate school in clinical social work in the 80s. I went into the program at the University of Denver in 1985. And this was the only time that Will White was ever a minority. And it was because I was literally, there was 125 people in that program, and there were 3 people who identified as male. It was the only time in my educational experience till that point. And what was it like when you went to your counseling program? Was it primarily women?
Yes, I will tell you, times have not changed much
Huh.
because there would be classes with 30, 40 individuals, and there maybe was 3 of us in the class. So maybe we've tripled since you
Mm.
were in the program, but it's still,
Gotcha.
it's very heavily skewed towards women. And full transparency, I did not finish the program. I did 50 of the 60 hours, which the internships and such were left. I was actually working in wilderness therapy when I decided to exit the program at that point. And part of it was a challenge that I believe I was learning and the work that I was doing in those classes, I didn't think met the need of men. And
Mm.
that is truly the niche or the market or the section of human beings that I wanted to work with. And I wasn't sure I was getting exactly what I wanted from the program.
And yet you learn so much about leading men in the military. And it's funny, this is bringing up some issues for me because in graduate school, we took classes, even in the 80s, working with women, working with minorities, working with LGBTQ plus. Never had a class, and I actually did independent study on working with men. And it was very interesting. And I want to say it was very beneficial to take those classes because I am
100%.
a person of privilege. I'm the epitome of white privilege. And you're the epitome of man. So you went to the military, which is a male dominated service. And what brought you to join the military and what was your career in the military?
Yeah, so I grew up with a patriotic family. I'm from Georgia originally. I think it's a natural thing to be patriotic, maybe even more so in the South. And there's the pros and cons of that we don't need to dive into. But really, senior year of high school, I had already applied and been accepted to college, but I was looking for something different. Sports had ended for me post basketball season, senior year. And I'm like, what is out there? And I found a book called Making the Corps on Marine Corps boot camp and just the history and tradition and camaraderie and just esprit de corps, for lack of a better phrase, that the Marine Corps is based on and prides itself on, spoke to me as a young man, 17 years old, I believe 17 years old, senior year, looking for what was next. And yes, of course, at that point, hey, everyone's got to go to college, everything's college prep focused, but I wanted something different. And I think it was that pull for that rite of passage. Like, how do I walk through this door into adulthood? How do I challenge myself to become a better version, bigger, stronger, tougher? And I had been through some bullying when I was a freshman in high school that I think truly impacted me now that I've studied mental health and trauma and all of the connecting dots there. But the book really spoke to me. And from that point on, even through college, I went through the officer selection program, trained during the summers in college, was fortunate enough to earn a commission as a officer in the Marine Corps, and then served as an infantry officer, male dominated 100% at the time. There has now been a little more integration in that occupational specialty, but I chose the infantry again because it was what the Marine Corps was known for. And it was 100% male. I wanted to serve and deploy overseas. Obviously, at that point, that was 2005 into six. We were heavily engaged in Iraq. Afghanistan had come and slowed and then picked up later. But it was an opportunity to prove myself, to challenge myself, and then to serve the country.
And did it do all those things for you? What was your experience like?
Yes, overall, very positive experience. I am nothing but grateful for that experience. It definitely shaped me into the human and man that I am today. There were obviously challenges in that. And I think coming into the Marine Corps as a second lieutenant at 22 years old, stepping into a platoon / company of Marines who were almost all combat veterans at that point, who had been to Afghanistan and Iraq, and we were immediately turning around and going right back. You learned beautiful examples of leadership, how to keep your ego in check, and really how to grow up very quickly. And it was definitely a very positive experience. It challenged me 100%. It taught me a lot of things about leadership and humanity. And yeah, again, just truly shaped me as a human being.
And how long were you in the service? What was your plan afterwards? How did you execute that plan?
Yes, so I served for 8 years. I finished my time in Quantico as an instructor, teaching all of the new officers that come into the Marine Corps. You go through 6 months of training at the basic school. So I taught there for 3 years as an instructor in leadership and tactics and decision making and all of those things. And then I really got into health and fitness throughout my time in the military and pursued coaching in health and fitness as I transitioned out, which eventually, soon after I transitioned, led to me opening my own fitness facility in just north of Quantico, Virginia.
Huh. So you wanted to keep helping men, but more physically or mentally too. Mind, body, spirit, we all know
Mhm.
a healthy body can also help your mind and vice versa. And so you went that route. And How did you end up working? You were at, I believe, New Visions for a year or two. What was that transition like?
Yeah, so I owned the gym for 6, 7 years leading up to COVID. And I had started an after school program as well in that time, working with at risk middle schoolers and started mentoring young boys who were in the program. They would come back to my gym and work for me. And a lot of these young men were first generation citizens. They were not privileged in any way and kind of gave them an opportunity to just be in an atmosphere to help themselves. So, long story longer, after transitioning from the gym, I had launched an online wellness company, which allowed me to travel during COVID. And I really got back in touch with being outdoors. So I traveled out west, every major national park, national forest, traveling up and down the West Coast through Oregon, Washington State, Utah. It was an amazing experience. And as I'm doing this, I'm looking for what is next. I've been helping in wilderness therapy. I've started, not wilderness therapy, in men's groups. I've started studying for mental health counseling. And I just started looking like, what's out there? And I
Um,
stumbled upon wilderness therapy, actually Deschutes Wilderness Therapy in Bend, Oregon. And I saw there was a couple job openings. So I was like, what is wilderness therapy? I started doing research and just found all of these organizations. And I was like, I think this is what's next? I think this is where I belong. So I started looking at opportunities. And about 6 months later, I had gotten my wilderness first responder certification. And I applied for a position at First Light Wilderness back in Georgia, where I grew up, and had the opportunity to meet, Drew Hornbeck, Steve Sawyer. I interviewed with Danny Frazier at Open Sky. So I had contact with a lot of these individuals that are in your book and were
and
just
they've been on the
amazing humans.
podcast. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
And have
can.
been on the podcast. And I was able to have the opportunity to transition and serve as program director at First Light, which worked well. Like I wanted to transition back home after being gone for almost 2 decades to be close to aging parents. And it was just an impactful and beautiful experience that, again, I think I've been so lucky to have these experiences that have just shaped me, and I've had the opportunity to serve in many different capacities.
Not only lucky, but you're intentional. What I'm looking for something. What am I looking for? So during COVID, which a lot of times, a lot of us were spending more time outside. I actually think that's why there's more people interested in outdoor mental health. You look for a sign and you got a sign, whatever it was, whatever showed up in your inbox, or it was Google's algorithm pointing you in a direction, and you
Yeah.
found a job and you worked there for a year. Were you there till it closed, or did you do a period of time and then leave
Yeah, I
on
did a
your own
period of
volition?
time. Yep, and left on my own volition. I actually, when we started planning and then eventually were fortunate to become pregnant with my daughter, I decided to make the hard choice to transition out of the role as program director. I was spending a lot of time in the field, rushing to the field with the unknown circumstances that is wilderness therapy. And I was like, I don't think this is where I want to be as I bring home a newborn, as I really want to be present for my daughter as she's born. There was a lot of late nights, weeks in the field, emergency situations, and it wasn't who I wanted to be for my daughter. So I made the challenging decision to step away from the field, and I found a career doing actually business coaching. So still coaching at home for the time being, but I continue to be drawn towards that field. I know there's been so many challenges in the field, but someone that's worked in it and seen the beauty that is wilderness therapy, I continue, and I think inspired by maybe your talk at Wilderness Therapy Symposium 2022, perhaps the future of wilderness therapy.
That talk. Okay. Yeah, I've done a few different talks, but I remember that. So what did you take from that talk?
Yeah, you specifically mentioned veteran opportunities and opportunities for other populations as opposed to younger people and children, instead looking at what are the opportunities to use the power of the wilderness for those older populations. And I was sitting there contemplating what was I going to be doing in the future, as I had really already made the decision to step away at that point. And being a veteran, that spoke to me. And then now being a dad, it continues to push me to find a way to get men and dads out into the wild.
Yeah, so they can come back refreshed and be there for. And I do have to say, having worked in this field for a very long time when my kids little, one of my biggest regrets, I wasn't always there for them. Wilderness therapy or any mental health treatment that is residential nature, it never stops. It's 24/7, 360.
Mm.
And there were events, and my kids are now men, young men, can recite, you missed this, you weren't. And
Mm.
it's definitely, I'm trying to make up for it now in my life, but it is, I salute you for making a real conscious choice. Like, I'm a dad now, and I got to be there for my daughter. And that speaks a lot to your integrity, because I'm sure they wanted you to stay there and keep helping out and taking care of things that were going on in the field.
Yeah, it's such a tough decision. And this is something we talk about with Dad's Project a lot. And it comes up almost every conversation, is that natural pull that men feel it. And I think it's what you were just speaking of, is you're the provider, you have a career, you're a man of service and integrity towards your work, but you also have this pull to be a present father and to be there when they need you and when they have games or recitals, or they just are there at home looking for that connection. And it's that natural pull that I don't think we've quite figured out for dads, for men societally. I think it's getting better. And the thing that makes it okay for me, and I want to share this with you because I appreciate you sharing that, is that you were doing the best you could. You were doing what you thought was necessary to provide, to be present, to give the best possible life for them. And I think we're all doing that.
Yeah, I hear you and I thank you. And at the same time, I was programmed that way. Like my father did that. And I really moved into a much better relationship with my father when I got to be my mid 20s, because
Mhm.
he was traveling a lot, like during that era. So I was at home in the 60s and 70s. So it was really classical model of father goes out and makes
Right.
the money, helps support. My mom did work too, but she did that more for the love of work. And now I think there's much more of a shift that, like, young people, boys need fathers there, and a lot of fathers can't be there because maybe they're in the military serving country
Right.
to help everybody. And it's that tension between those now, and that's going to shift because now more females are finishing college and going to college, and the gender, there's shifting in
Right.
what roles we're all taking. And for you to step away and say, I'm going to coach, and you chose not to go. It's interesting because I've been thinking about this coaching model, because coaching seems, part of the reason I'm going to do some coaching this fall is men are more open to going to coaching than they are therapy. I'm putting that out there. Is that your view of things?
Yes, I would agree with that. And I think the reason is that, and again, this is just my personal opinion, men have a challenge or a wall up with really looking in the past. Like, what have I already moved on from? I'm going to go back and dig that up, which is a lot of therapeutic work, which is valuable. But with coaching and the way that I've learned it through, I've gone back and got another certification in executive coaching, which I think is truly impactful and can translate, but it's focused on positive behavior change from now forward. So what got you here, either A, doesn't have to continue, or B, won't get you there. So if you want to be a more present father, if you want to deal with your anger, if you want to be more present, what is that positive behavior change that we can work on to get you where you want to be? Let's not block out, but let's focus on who you want to be moving forward. And what's that next easiest step?
So that's how you start the process, the coaching process with people. Awesome.
Absolutely.
We're talking about wilderness therapy in the last episode I just did with Noel's risk manager. And she was explaining, she was explaining, excuse me if I messed her name up, but no, it's Katie. Anyway, she was explaining that even at Knowles, the numbers are dropping at Knowles National Outdoor Leadership School. Outward bound, longer courses. And so it is not just wilderness therapy. There are other reasons why wilderness therapy programs, there are very few compared to when you worked in the field and
Right.
5 years ago. And yet it's a bigger thing. And what do you think about that? Why do you think young, because it's primarily the subject of his episode, why do you
Yeah.
think young boys and men aren't interested in going out on grand adventures, which drew me to the field to begin with?
Yeah, me as well. Honestly, I think it's distraction. The outdoors has to compete with this algorithmic enhancement that is social media, that is video games, that is so many avenues of entertainment. And when you're constantly stimulated by all of these things, I've got it right here in my hand.
I got mine
If an
right here too. Yeah.
now, if a young boy whose brain is still forming is consistently stimulated by these products that we give them as parents, right? Not me personally, but I know it's out there. Young kids have these, it's altering their brain. Walking on a trail does not compete. I believe it's better, but I'm a different generation, right? Does not compete with the second by second stimulation that is a first shooter combat video game, that is TikTok, Instagram, you name it. It doesn't compete. So we have to figure out how to pull them away. And this is part of that distraction presence, the whole thing. I think dads are struggling with it too. It's across the board age wise. How do we get them to leave the phone at home, go out and watch a sunrise, be in a rainstorm in a tent, hike to Blood Mountain in Georgia, 4.5 miles straight up, and be sweating and hot and not know if you can make it, and then make it for a beautiful view?
Mhm.
How do we create those experiences and facilitate them competing on a level that is against all the distraction? And I think that's the goal.
Yeah, it's so true. And having just gone to this retreat, all the men put their phones away, and within a couple of days, they're like, I'm so be looking at them, being
Mhm.
connected to it. I'm sure you saw that working the field and see that in life. And the other day we were out at an event with my kids, and they were sharing with someone at the event that they were the last in their community in their middle school to get a phone.
Mhm.
Myself and another therapist was the ones who didn't want their kids to get on the phone until later. And the reason I didn't, it was because I had read that all the tech, like Steve Jobs, and he didn't let his kids. I'm like, if you're not letting your kids and you're creating these things, I'm
Right.
thinking that I'm not going to do that for mine either, even though it certainly makes things easier. How about yours? What's your model? What are you thinking for your daughter? What age?
Never? Is that an option?
Could be, but
She'll be 2 in September, so we've definitely got some time. It is a
I will hope so.
Yeah, it is a hot topic. I've got an 11-year-old stepson as well, and we have 50-50 custody with him. And at the other home, he has a cell phone. He's got, YouTube and those types of things. And when he's with us, it doesn't, which causes a challenge. there's an emotional connection for him with that phone and being able to text friends and being on YouTube and his freedom to do what he thinks is right. And my wife and I are just not ready to allow him to have that step in our home. And in my mind, it's going to be high school or beyond until that is allowed. Because again, I think I saw a quote, maybe it was on, again, hey, this is me being hypocritical. Maybe it was on Instagram that I saw this quote. And it's, the moment you give a child a phone is the moment you stop their childhood. It limits their creativity. It takes away their imagination and it gives them something to do instead of creating a game outside, running down the street and playing with the kids. It gives them something just to sit and let it do its thing.
Yeah, I'm not completely against it because there are really some great benefits, especially educationally and connection.
Mhm.
COVID, a lot of people were able to connect. The research is certainly showing more impact girls getting bullied than boys on phones. But
Right.
let's shift back to this time that you practice outdoor mental health, which was in a wilderness therapy program. You get a story from that time that really you want to share about, yeah, this still impacts you today? I'm just wondering.
Yeah, I don't know if I have one story, but I think what still resonates with me is as the program director, I was fortunate to be there to greet the student on day one. And many of them would come with, I'm sure you've talked about on the podcast before, with transporters, some with family. And obviously, they were taking a step into a world that they were very unfamiliar. And there were a lot of challenging experiences with students that would come in. And I can think of two or three that came in, did not want to be there, were unprepared, and it was just a really challenging experience for them. But part of my role with the clinical director and my field director was to work with them that day and get them kitted out and get their equipment and get them out to our operating area. And I can remember getting them out there and seeing the students who had been there with us for a longer period of time, welcoming them into the group, helping them get their tent set up, making sure they had all the equipment they needed, and really welcoming them into the group. And I think that is such a beautiful and impactful experience. It reminds me of the military, walking into a platoon, and such a hard step, but being welcomed into that unit, that camaraderie, that esprit de corps. And then seeing those same students 30, 60 days later do the exact same thing for a new student and being able to have those connecting stories with them. And then the most beautiful experiences were as those students that I saw on day one who were struggling mentally, emotionally, go through the program and they're walking out the door a completely different human. A student from New York City or Chicago who had never been outside, had never spent a night outside, is now building and cooking on an open fire, hanging a bear hang, setting up their tent, helping others, sleeping in the cold and the rain. And now they're walking out of, and I think this is the beautiful part of wilderness therapy that needs to be cultivated with confidence. They feel empowered to move on to that next step. And I think it really gives them a purpose from, hey, my purpose right now is to get up and clean up my gear because we're going for a hike. My next purpose is I'm in charge of dinner tonight. And my next purpose is now I'm graduating a different human who has all of these skills and confidence that I can move forward with.
Mm.
And that cycle, that life cycle of a human being in the wilderness, learning the skills it takes to survive is what needs to be duplicated for every demographic. But for me, for dads, and then hopefully their kids in the future.
Yeah. It's funny because you're amplifying the positive aspects. And obviously, I don't want to discount some people had very negative aspects, and I share that in other episodes. But
Absolutely.
Ian, you're also sharing the similarities with the military and the field. go to my book, Stories from the Field, A History of Wilderness Therapy, there was this influence from the military, definitely Kurt Hahn and Outward Bound for sailors, and it was making people more resilient, sailors
Right.
more resilient, or in Boy Scout and Baden Powell, creating stronger military for the UK. And all of those systems, they kind of impacted wilderness therapy or influenced wilderness therapy. I don't know. Were you involved with scouting at all as a young person?
I was not in the Scouts. I was fortunate to have a really amazing summer camp program that
Oh, yeah.
I learned. I can remember it was called outdoor living, where you learn to build a fire and fish and cook the fish and all of these things. So that was definitely an impactful experience for me.
So you were programmed to be in the military at a young age.
Possibly.
Possibly. I'm certainly digging more into the benefits of outdoor experiences for men and boys. You have any other thoughts about that or experiences? And you've shared much of it, but I wanted to be like, hey, do you have one more story, or are you good in that segment?
Yeah, I think a lot of it, specifically when we get to men and boys, is that rite of passage and doing hard things. And I know you just had a focus of risk management on the podcast, and I think that is such an important part and a huge aspect of what we do in the military when we're training is that risk management. ORM, what's your plan? What are the possible scenarios and how are you going to handle them? And that's an opportunity for you to check your ego. And I think this is where some of the challenges start is when you don't check your ego, you don't prepare properly, and then accidents happen. And for men and boys, it's facilitating a safe, challenging experience or rite of passage to give them something to pull on when things get hard, when they're getting bullied, when, their career as a dad gets challenging, when relationships are tough. They can pull on those hard experiences. Like, I've been through hard things. I've come out the other side. And I think we've lost a lot of that in today's society. So bringing wilderness back, it's as easy as going overnight camping. One night can be hard for many people. But how are we facilitating that in a safe way so it's a challenging while positive experience? I am 100% on board with your focus this season. I think it's an opportunity and a impactful area to dive into. I'm excited to hear more about your experience from your summit this past weekend, and then hopefully be a part of the journey to help facilitate that rite of passage for many dads. And hopefully that trickles down to their kids.
That experience at Soul Degree with Chris Robbins was really impactful. And I'm going to talk about it in a little bit, but right now it's too fresh. I'm writing about it, etc. And he's going to be on the podcast. But how did your military experience influence the way you approach your coaching?
Yeah, first and foremost, what really impacted me in the Marine Corps was the obsession with leadership by example. And as a leader, or a coach, you can talk and talk and talk and talk. And I think this is relevant for dads as well. But how are you living that example? How are you showing up in a certain way? And that impacts everything I do, from executive coaching to working with dads. I want to conduct myself in a way and coach in a way that sets a positive example. And the same thing goes for my stepson and my daughter. I want them to see me doing things, whether it's going for a walk after dinner, it's going out into the woods. We were camping this past weekend, and I'm helping the 11-year-old set up his one-man tent. And we're fishing and we're swimming and we're hiking and we're doing these things. I'm not just saying you should do them and not doing them myself. Right. And that truly impacts how I show up as a coach, as a parent, and then hopefully as I continue to focus on Dad's project, how it impacts that movement.
For men navigating life transitions, whether it's leaving the military or wilderness therapy, moving into sort of a more step step down and working not as many hours because getting older and it's harder to do things. How do you help people who are struggling with those issues? The content's different, but the
Right.
process is the same. What do you notice and how do you dive them for anybody particularly? But I'm always looking for guidance and
Yeah.
someone who is a great coach.
Yeah. First and foremost, I think men tend to self-isolate. It's, hey, I'm not going to talk about what I'm challenged with right now. I don't want to seem like I'm needy. I'm not going to reach out for help. And this is men of all ages, boys included. And what I really strive to do through my coaching, and I think this is why the groups are so impactful, is to create connection, to realize that you are not the only person going through this. There's another dad down the street. There's another man in your network that is experiencing the same exact thing you are. And lo and behold, you both think you are the only one in the world that is having this problem right now. And I challenge you to reach out and say, hey, let's grab a coffee, or hey, let's hop on the phone. How are you? And just see what comes up and be present. Be where your feet are. If you're having coffee or lunch or dinner or a phone call or a Zoom call, be present with that other dad or with that other man and say, hey, you're part of my support network. I want you to know that. And I'm having some challenges right now, and this is what they look like. Open kimono. Like, I'm really struggling with the relationship with my stepson, or I'm feeling isolated and I don't really have any friends. Like, we know the loneliness epidemic is hitting men very hard. So my challenge is to get out of your comfort zone, step into that learning or growth zone, and reach out to someone and say, hey, you're part of my support network. I don't know if you knew that, but you are. And I'm here to support you too.
Well, I'll take that as an invitation, Nick. Thank you.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. That's one of the benefits of the retreat I just went through. Like, we're all texting each other, and
Yes.
actually the second highest population of men who are successful in completing suicide is 50 and 60-year-olds in America right now. And that's an interesting trend. I'll probably dig more into it, but it reflects what's going on. And what's cool is people are open to talking about it. And at least I'm hoping they'll be open to listening to it this season on the podcast or on your podcast. And I look forward to being on it in the next month. There's a couple months, whenever.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And how do people get in touch with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So LinkedIn is a great way, Nick Mann, or you can look up Dad's Project on LinkedIn and it'll point you to me somehow, or Instagram, Dad's Project, or you can search for the Dad's Project podcast on Spotify and YouTube if you want to follow along.
Well, Nick Mann, thank you so much for sharing your story on Stories from the Field and kicking off this season 24 about men and boys.
Will, thank you so much. It was an honor.